I spent 6 hours trying to explain to High Command why 4 carnivorous predator cubs had submitted a 40-page legal document demanding constitutional rights for their human. Let me back up, you need context for this madness. I'm Keithar Station, Commander for Orbital Research Platform. Theta 9. 8 cycles I've held this position. 8 cycles of managing 300 scientists, keeping volatile experiments from exploding and ensuring our collection of xenobiological specimens doesn't eat each other. I thought I'd seen everything. Crystalline-based life forms that sang in frequencies that shattered glass, methane breathers that corroded whole plating, once a gelatinous species that kept escaping through the air filtration system. But nothing, and I mean nothing, in my entire career prepared me for Harper. She wasn't supposed to be important. She was maintenance, specifically environmental systems. Maintenance third shift, the kind of human who crawled through ductwork, checking airflow and replacing filters. We had 12 humans on maintenance rotation. I couldn't have named 3 of them before this incident. The cubs arrived 6 weeks before Harper entered my awareness. A colony transport had suffered catastrophic failure near our sector. We were closest. When our rescue teams boarded, they found carnage. The adults, massive quadrupedal predators from Karntaken, had turned on each other in some kind of territorial frenzy. Blood everywhere, claw marks gouged into the walls. Only 4 survivors, 4 cubs huddled in a storage compartment, maybe 4 to 6 cycles old. Protocol was clear. Quarantine, observation, assessment of threat level. Dr. Felma, our xenopsychology specialist, had been adamant these were Carnathy predators, apex predators from a death world where everything had fangs, claws, and a taste for fresh meat. The cubs might look almost cute with their oversized paws and fluffy fur, but they were presentient at best, instinct-driven killing machines in adorable packages. We built them a containment unit, Xenobiology Wing 7, reinforced walls, pressure doors, automated feeding systems that delivered nutrition blocks through sealed chutes. Observation only, no direct contact, standard procedure for dangerous specimens. The cubs did what cubs do. They ate. They slept in piles. They fought with enough force to dent the floor. Plating, they made sounds, growls and chirps, and these rumbling purr when they slept. Cameras recorded everything. Scientists analyzed their behavior patterns. Everyone agreed they showed problem-solving abilities consistent with pack hunters, but no signs of higher cognition. 3 weeks into observation, we started hearing sounds from the floor vents, not from the cubs. Different sounds, roaring, deep, resonant roaring that echoed through the ductwork and rattled into adjacent labs. Scientists complained, equipment registered vibrations. We checked for structural damage. Nothing. The sounds continued, irregular but frequent, always from the vents. I assigned someone to investigate. Harper drew the work order. I didn't think anything of it. Maintenance does hundreds of repairs each week. I signed off on the assignment without looking at the details. Harper went into the vent system with her tools and her scanning equipment, following the sound back to its source. She found the cubs, or more accurately, the cubs found her. The vent system connected to their containment unit through an access panel I didn't even know existed. Old construction before we'd converted that section to xenobiology. The panel had a grate, the cubs could see through it, they could smell her. When Harper came crawling through on her maintenance check, they were waiting. I didn't learn any of this until 3 weeks later. 3 weeks during which Harper apparently decided that 4 apex predators were, in her professional opinion, good boys who needed structure and enrichment. The first indication something was wrong came at 300 hours. Security Chief Brandt called me out of deep sleep with a voice that suggested reality had broken. "Commander, you need to see this." "See what?" The Cubs submitted paperwork. I thought he was joking. Brantock doesn't joke. I dragged myself to the security office, still wearing sleep clothes. He had footage pulled up on every screen. I stared. The Cubs sat in a perfect line. Not sprawled, not wrestling. Sitting hunches down, tails still, all 4 facing the observation camera with identical posture. In front of them, arranged on the floor with clear deliberation, were sheets of paper covered in claw marks. How did they get paper? I asked. "Watch." Brantock reversed the footage. Harper crawling out of the floor vent at 2200 hours like this was completely normal. The Cubs swarmed her. I tensed, waiting for violence. Instead, they were wagging, actually wagging their tails, making happy chirping sounds. Harper sat down cross-legged on the floor and let them climb on her while she scratched behind their ears. "Sweet, merciful void," I whispered. It got worse. Harper pulled things from her maintenance bag, not tools, toys. Rubber balls, rope tied in knots. She threw the ball. The Cubs chased it. They brought it back. She praised them in that high-pitched voice humans use for small creatures and gave them something from her pocket. Treats. She was giving carnivorous predators treats. Then the training started. Harper held up her hand, palm out, made a sound. The Cubs sat, all 4 of them. Immediate response. She praised them. Again, more treats, then another gesture, a different sound. The Cubs lay down, another gesture. They stood. She had them following commands like they'd been domesticated for generations, instead of being rescued from a massacre. 3 weeks ago, the paper came out near the end. Harper had a whole stack of it. She sat there, drawing symbols while the Cubs watched. Then she gave one cub a writing stylus, the kind with a thick grip. The cub held it in its mouth, surprisingly delicate for something with 2 in fangs. Harper guided it, showing how to make marks on paper. "She's teaching them to write," Brantock said, voice hollow. "That's not possible." I was still processing the domestication. The writing felt like a step too far into unreality. They're presentient, instinct-driven. They can't learn symbolic communication. "Commander," Brantock zoomed in on the papers arranged in front of the Cubs. They didn't just learn it, they used it. The claw marks weren't random. They formed letters, human letters, crude but recognizable. I could make out words: Harper, good, stay, food, and at the top of one sheet, in careful scratches, rules for being nice to Harper. My career flashed before my eyes. "Get Felmo," I said. "Get the full xenopsychology team and someone find out what else Harper has been doing in that vent." The answer was everything. Harper had been visiting the Cubs every single night for 3 weeks. Her maintenance logs showed legitimate work orders, vent inspections and filter replacements and airflow testing, but security footage, once we knew to look for it told a different story. She'd been spending 2 to 3 hours in that containment unit every night, systematically teaching 4 predator cubs how to be civilized. Thelma arrived within 20 minutes, took one look at the footage and went completely silent. That's how I knew it was serious. Thelma always had theories, explanations, scientific frameworks. Her silence meant every framework had just shattered. Play it again, she finally said. We watch Harper work. She had a system. Commands first, sit, stay down, come. Gentle, the cubs learned fast. Frighteningly fast, then boundaries. Harper would put a treat on the floor and tell them to wait. They'd quiver with anticipation but wouldn't move until she gave permission. She taught them gentle mouth, holding her hand out for them to touch with closed jaws. She taught them not to jump on her, redirecting the behavior until they greeted her with controlled enthusiasm instead of predatory pouncing. She's treating them like domestic animals, Thelma said. They're responding like domestic animals, I replied. They shouldn't be capable of this. Thelma pulled up biological data on a secondary screen. Carnassi's neural structures don't support this level of behavioral modification. They're hardwired for pack hunting, fight or flight, territorial aggression. They don't have the cognitive flexibility for learned obedience to a non-pack member. Tell that to them. Brantok gestured at the screen where all 4 cubs sat, perfectly still, waiting for Harper's next command. We kept watching. The training evolved. Over the 3 weeks, Harper introduced problems. She'd hide treats and make them search using only her directional cues. She'd create obstacle courses from maintenance equipment. She taught them to differentiate between objects, pointing at specific tools and having them retrieve the correct one. The cubs succeeded at everything. Their success rate increased each session. They were learning how to learn. Then came the enrichment activities. Harper brought things from elsewhere on the station, puzzle boxes designed for crew recreation. The cubs figured them out, sorting games for children. The cubs mastered them, math problems using colored blocks. The cubs could count. This is published research waiting to happen. Film a breath. This is overturning decades of xenobiological classification. This is a maintenance worker treating apex predators like badly behaved pets. I corrected. The final footage was from 3 hours ago. Harper had brought more paper. She drew pictures, crude stick figures, representing the cubs herself and other station personnel. She told them stories I couldn't hear. The audio clearly through the vent. Acoustics, but her body language suggested she was explaining social structures, rules, why we had them, why following rules made everyone safer and happier. The cubs listened with complete focus. When she finished, she gave them paper and styluses. She left them working. 6 hours later, they produced 40 pages. Thelma and I read through the document together. My hands shook. The writing was crude, letters formed by claws, designed for ripping flesh, not calligraphy. But the content was sophisticated, frighteningly sophisticated. The cubs had created a legal framework. It started with definitions. What made someone part of a pack? What responsibilities pack members had to each other? What fair treatment meant? Then it moved into specifics about Harper. She was pack, therefore she deserved protection. Therefore anyone who threatened her would face consequences. The consequences were detailed. Proportional responses escalating. Deterrence. They'd invented a justice system. Final section made demands. Harper should have protected status. She should be allowed unlimited access to their containment. She should be consulted before any changes to their environment, and in words that made my brain hurt, all pack members deserve representation in decisions affecting their lives. They'd argued for sentient rights. Get Harper up here, I told Branto. Right now, she arrived in her maintenance uniform, tool belt still on. Completely confused about why the station commander wanted to see her at 400 hours. She was short for a human, barely reaching my shoulder. Young, maybe 25 standard years, she had grease smudged on one cheek and her hair pulled back in a practical knot. Am I in trouble? She asked. That depends, I said carefully, on whether you're aware you've been conducting unauthorized contact with dangerous xenobiological specimens for 3 weeks. Harper blinked. The cubs, they're not dangerous, they're babies. They're apex predators. They're babies who needed socialization and structure. Harper said dislike. It was obvious. Nobody was working with them. They were getting bored and frustrated. Bored. Predators develop behavioral problems. Behavioral problems, Thelma repeated. Faintly, resource guarding aggression. Destructive tendencies, basic animal psychology. Harper looked between us. Wait, you didn't know I was training them? Training them, I said. Is that what you call teaching persentient predators to read and write legal documents? Oh, you saw that? Harper brightened. They're so smart, it only took 2 weeks before they understood symbolic representation. Once they got the concept, they just took off with it. Rex is especially good with syntax. Rex, the big male with the notch in his ear. I had to name them. You can't do relationship-based training without individual recognition. Harper pulled out a data pad, completely casual. I've been keeping notes. Their learning rate is actually comparable to working dog breeds on Earth, maybe faster for problem-solving tasks. They've got incredible focus once you teach them impulse control. Thelma made a sound like air escaping. Hull breach. You're a maintenance worker, I said, trying to anchor myself to facts. What qualifies you to train xenobiological specimens? I trained dogs before I joined station crew. Harper shrugged. Professionally. Competition level, obedience and agility. The principles are the same. Positive reinforcement, clear communication, consistent boundaries. The cubs respond really well to it. They're not dogs. No, they're smarter than most dogs. Way better problem solving. I'd say comparable to border collies. Maybe, but with better communication potential once you account for the language barrier. Harper looked at the document still displayed on screen. Is something wrong with their proposal? I helped them format it, but the ideas are all theirs. They really wanted to make sure I'd be safe. The cubs had refused food for 12 hours. Before Harper's scheduled visit, they'd begun a hunger strike. I found this out when Branto pulled me aside with medical telemetry showing dangerous declines in the cubs' vital signs. They won't eat. He said, automated feeding delivered nutrition blocks 2 hours ago. The cubs pushed them into a pile in the corner. They're sitting by the vent making distress calls. I pulled up the live feed. All 4 cubs sat facing the floor vent perfectly, still except for the occasional whimper. Waiting, their body language screamed. Anxiety. They're waiting for Harper, Filma said. Quietly, she'd been analyzing their behavior. Patterns. Look at the posture, the orientation. They've learned she comes through that. Vent. They're refusing to engage in normal activities until she arrives. That's attachment behavior, I said. That's pack bonding, Filma corrected. They've integrated her into their social structure. She's not a handler or a trainer to them, she's family. Harper was in the room. She saw the cubs on screen and made a distressed sound. They're scared, they don't understand. Where I am, you visited them every night. For 3 weeks, I said, you established a routine, they expect you. Can I go to them? Harper asked, please. There. Stress is bad for developing predators. It can cause permanent behavioral issues. I looked at Felma, she looked at Brantock. Brantock looked at me. We were supposed to be the experts. We had degrees, certifications, years of experience. Harper had a maintenance certification and a background in dog training. Cubs had bonded with Harper. They'd learned from Harper. They'd become something unprecedented because of Harper. Get a safety team together, I told Brant. Full quarantine protocols. Harper goes in, but we monitor everything. Harper was already moving toward the door. The safety protocols took 40 minutes to implement. Harper vibrated with impatience while we suited her in monitoring equipment. The cubs' distress calls got louder, echoing through the ventilation system, until 3 adjacent labs filed noise complaints. They're crying, Harper said, struggling into the tracking harness. This is cruel. This is necessary, I replied, but guilt twisted in my gut. The cubs sounded like children calling for a parent. When Harper finally entered through the main containment door, not the vent, the cubs exploded with relief. They swarmed her, tails whipping, making sounds I'd never heard before, happy sounds. They didn't jump on her, I noticed. They pressed against her legs, rubbing their heads on her hands, vocally ecstatic, but physically controlled. Harper dropped to her knees and let them mob her. I'm sorry, I didn't know they wouldn't let me come. It's okay now. Rex, the largest cub, made a questioning rumble. Harper pulled out her data pad and showed him something, a schedule. I realized from our camera angle she was explaining why she'd been late. The cub studied it, then made a huffing sound. That seemed like acceptance. Did he just acknowledge understanding a schedule? Felma whispered over the comm. Get your xenopsychology team together, I said, all of them right now. 3 xenopsychologists arrived within the hour. Dr. Vorek, specialist, predator cognition. Dr. Selin, expert in behavioral conditioning. Dr. Trameth, who'd written the definitive text on sapience markers. I gave them all the footage, all the documentation, the legal proposal the cubs had written. Then I took them to observation. Harper had the cubs doing training exercises, not the basic commands. Any more complex sequences, she'd arranged obstacles around the containment unit and had them navigating courses on her direction, but it wasn't just following orders. She'd give them problems. Get the red ball from behind the barrier without knocking over the stack. The cubs would analyze, plan, execute. When they succeeded, she praised them and offered treats from her pocket. Standard operant conditioning, Vorex. Said dismissively, reward-based. Learning, you can teach a Terran rat to. Push buttons for food, this doesn't. Indicate higher cognition. Watch Felma said Harper had drawn. Symbols on sheets of paper, simple. Shapes circle, square, triangle, she. Showed Rex a sequence, circle, square. Circle, then she gave him papers with the shapes and backed away. Rex studied them, then using his mouth to move the papers, he recreated the pattern. Harper added complexity. Circle, square, triangle, square. Rex completed it, she made it longer, he succeeded. Pattern recognition, Fornak said, but his voice had lost certainty. Harper switched cubs. Mika the female. Harper drew a picture, crude stick figure of herself next to stick figures of the 4 cubs. She pointed at each drawing, then at each real cub, establishing that drawings represented real things. Mika's ears swiveled, forward focused. Then Harper drew a new stick figure, this one with the proportions of station crew. She pointed at the observation window where we watched. Mika looked at the drawing, looked at the window, made a chittering sound at her siblings. All 4 cubs looked at us. They understand symbolic representation. Selene said slowly, that's not pattern recognition, that's abstract thinking. It gets better, I said grimly. Harper was teaching math. She had colored blocks arranged in groups. She'd point at a group and hold up fingers. 3 blocks, 3 fingers. The cubs learned to associate quantity with number. Then she introduced addition. 2 blocks plus 1 block equals 3 blocks. She'd give them new problems. They'd solve them by arranging blocks, then showing the answer with their paws. Tremeth made a strangled noise. This is tool use, mathematical reasoning, symbolic logic. These are Sapiens markers. They're presentient specimens. Fornak insisted, our classification is clear. Carnathy predators don't have the neural architecture for this. Then explain that, Felma said, pointing at the screen. Harper had given the cubs papers and styluses. She'd drawn a simple scene, herself bringing food to them. Then she'd drawn an X through it, communicating that she might not always be able to visit. The cubs responded by drawing. Their images were crude, but the meaning was clear. Rex drew Harper with other station crew, making her look scared. Then he drew the cubs between Harper and the crew, protective stance. Ma drew Harper with a collar around her neck like prey, then drew herself. Removing it, they were expressing abstract concepts, fear, protection, freedom. Get high command on comms, I told Brantock. Now the conversation with high command went poorly. Admiral Thesser listened to my report with increasing disbelief. You're telling me a maintenance worker accidentally uplifted 4 predator cubs using dog training techniques? That's the situation. Yes, and these cubs have now produced legal documents demanding rights, constitutional rights specifically. Silence stretched over the channel. Then the Cesar said, Commander, do you understand the implications if these cubs are truly sapient? We've been keeping sentient beings in containment without trial, education, or legal representation for 6 weeks. Yes. The Galactic Council will have our research licenses revoked. We'll face criminal charges. This station will be shut down. Only if the cubs are actually sapient, I said. We need proper testing. Then test them. Use the standard protocols. I want a full sapience evaluation within 24 hours. The evaluation was a disaster. Dr. Vorek set up the tests in a separate chamber, standard protocols developed over centuries, puzzle boxes that required multi-step problem solving, pattern completion tests, social reasoning scenarios, communication assessments, every test designed to measure cognitive capability against established sapiens thresholds. The cubs refused to cooperate. Vorek placed a puzzle box in front of Rex. The cub looked at. Vorek lay down and closed his eyes. Subject shows no interest in puzzle solving task. Vorek recorded, "He's ignoring you." Felma said, "That's not the same as incapability." Vorek tried the other cubs, same result. They'd look at the test, look at him, then deliberately turn away. Tesk actually yawned. "This is ridiculous." Vorek snapped, "These are the same tests that identified sapiens in 43 species. If the cubs were truly intelligent, they'd engage. Unless they're making a choice not to engage," I said. "Presentient animals don't make that kind of choice." Harper had been watching from observation. She walked into the test chamber without asking permission. Immediately, all 4 cubs perked up, tails wagging, alert and focused. "May I?" Harper asked, gesturing to the puzzle box. Vornek waved dismissively. Harper placed the box in front of Rex. "Show them what you can do, buddy." Rex opened the puzzle box in 15 seconds. It should have taken 5 minutes minimum. Harper moved to the pattern completion test. "Ma, your turn." Ma completed the pattern perfectly. Then, without prompting, she created 3 additional patterns of increasing complexity. Harper worked through every test. The cubs performed flawlessly, not just meeting sapient thresholds, but exceeding them. They solved problems Vorek hadn't even presented yet, anticipating the logical progression of difficulty. When they finished, all 4 sat in formation and looked at Varocha with expressions that clearly communicated satisfied. Now they were sandbagging, T. Math said, something like awe in his voice. They deliberately failed until their preferred handler was present. That's not just intelligence. That's social manipulation. Strategic thinking. Vorek looked physically ill. "This doesn't make sense. Their neural scans don't show capacity for this level of cognition. Maybe we've been scanning for the wrong things," Felma suggested. "Different species, different architecture. The cubs process information differently than we expected." My comm chimed. Brantuk's voice came through tight with stress. "Commander, we have a situation. The cubs just produced another document." I pulled it up on my data pad. This one was shorter, 3 pages. The writing was clearer than before. The cubs were improving rapidly. I read it twice to make sure I understood. Harper's Safety Protocols, the title. Read. Below that, detailed rules for how station personnel should behave around Harper. Maintain respectful distance. Use calm voices. No sudden movements. Never touch her without permission. Never prevent her from accessing the cubs. Violations would result in appropriate protective responses. The cubs had created a code of conduct for protecting their human. They'd essentially made her untouchable. "This is a threat." Brantok said. "This is a legal framework." Felma corrected. "Look at the language. They're not promising violence, they're establishing boundaries and consequences. That's civilization." My comm exploded with alerts. security. Feeds from Xenobiology Wing 7, the Cubs, had stopped responding to automated systems. They'd pushed their nutrition blocks into a pile again. Medical telemetry showed stress responses building. Then I saw why. Harper's scheduled visit was in 30 minutes. Security Chief Brandt had flagged her personnel file with a restriction code preventing her access to the containment unit. The Cubs knew. Somehow they knew. Rex approached the reinforced wall. He studied it for a moment. Then he began methodically testing the barriers, searching for weaknesses with systematic precision. The other Cubs joined him, not frenzied. Coordinated, they were problem-solving their way toward freedom. "Open the door," I said. "Let Harper in." "Commander, we haven't established protocols. They're going to break out if we don't." "Look at them, they're not acting on instinct, they're planning an escape." The Cubs found a seam in the wall. Plating, Tesk wedged his claws in and pulled. The reinforced plate buckled. "Sir, they shouldn't have that kind of strength." "Motivated strength," Felma said. "They're not trying to escape for themselves, they're trying to reach Harper." My data pad chimed with an incoming message from High Command. Admiral Thesser's words made my blood run cold. "Galactic Species Classification Bureau is sending a team. They'll arrive in 6 hours if the Cubs are determined. Sapient, we're facing criminal charges for illegal detention. If they're not, we need to explain how pre-sentient animals produce legal documents. Either way, Commander, your career is over." The Cubs had torn through the first reinforced plate. Alarms screamed through the station. The Classification Bureau team arrived. In 4 hours, not 6, they came with lawyers, ethics board members, and 3 senior xenobiologists whose credentials made our entire staff look like undergraduates. Lead investigator was a Koraxi named Sethlin, six-limbed and coldly professional. She reviewed our documentation in silence while her team set up equipment in observation. When she finished, she looked at me with multifaceted eyes that revealed nothing. "This situation is unprecedented," Seth said. "If these Cubs possess sapiens, this station has committed species-level rights violations. If they don't, someone has perpetrated an elaborate hoax. Either scenario ends badly for you, Commander." "I'm aware. We'll conduct independent testing. Your staff will not interfere. The human Harper will not be present. The Cubs won't cooperate without her. Then they'll demonstrate their lack of true sapience." Seth's tone suggested she'd already decided. Genuine intelligence doesn't require specific handlers, it adapts. I wanted to argue. The Cubs had already shown they wouldn't perform for strangers, but Seth outranked me by several pay grades and had legal authority to shut down our entire operation. I nodded and stepped back. The Bureau team entered the containment unit, full protective gear. The Cubs, who'd been pacing anxiously since Harper's restricted access, immediately went still. 4 predators utterly motionless, watching the strangers with unblinking focus. Seth placed a complex puzzle in the center of the room. Standard sapience assessment. Solve this to proceed. The Cubs didn't move. Subject refusal to engage. Seth recorded clinically. Attempting alternative stimulus. She tried 6 different tests. Pattern recognition, tool use, social reasoning, scenarios. The Cubs sat perfectly still for all of them, forming a tight group, backs to the Testers, they'd created a defensive formation. They're scared, Harper said from observation. She'd been forbidden from entering, but insisted on watching. They don't know. These people, you're triggering fear. Responses. Fear is an emotion, Seth said. Animals experience fear. It proves nothing. They're not acting afraid, they're acting defensive. There's a difference. Seth ignored her. Subjects demonstrate no engagement with sapient testing. Protocol. Initial assessment suggests previous results were anomalous or fabricated. Try showing them, Harper, I suggested. Even on screen, that would contaminate the results. The results are already contaminated. You're getting false negatives because you're using the wrong methodology. Seth turned to face me fully. Commander, are you suggesting centuries of established testing protocols are flawed? I'm suggesting these cubs learned civilization from a human dog trainer. Maybe they don't respond to your protocols because they're operating on a completely different social framework. Before Seth could respond, Rex made a sound, low, resonant, purposeful. The other cubs joined in, creating a harmony that made the walls vibrate, not random vocalizations, structured, intentional. What are they doing? Seth asked. Felma pulled up acoustic analysis. It's communication, complex communication. They're not just making noise, they're transmitting information through frequency modulation and rhythmic pattern. The roaring continued, building in volume and complexity. Then it stopped abruptly. All four cubs turned to face the observation window. Specifically, they looked directly at Harper. Me approached the glass. She lifted one paw and began making deliberate gestures. Point at herself, point at Harper, circular motion with paw again. And again, the meaning was unmistakable. Even across species barriers, she wanted Harper. She was asking for Harper. That symbolic gesture, Treth said quietly, self-awareness, recognition of other minds, request formulation. Those are sapience markers. Animals can be trained to gesture, Seth countered, but uncertainty crept into her voice. Rex picked up one of the test puzzles Seth had presented. He carried it to the observation window and deliberately solved it while maintaining eye contact with Harper through the glass. Then he pushed it aside and retrieved another. Solved that one too. He worked through all 6 tests, completing them perfectly, never looking away from Harper. The message was clear. We can do your tests, we choose not to. Not for you, spite, I said. That's spite. Presentient animals don't have spite. Seth stood frozen, processing. Her legal advisor whispered urgently in her auditory receptors. Finally she spoke. Bring in the human. Harper moved. Before I could respond, she entered the containment unit, and the cubs swarmed her with desperate relief. They vocalized, rubbed against her, clearly communicating distress about the strangers. It's okay, Harper soothed them. They just wanted to meet you. They didn't understand the proper introduction protocols. She turned to Sethlin. You can't just walk up to a pack and demand they perform for you. That's not how social species work. You need to be introduced properly, establish trust, demonstrate you're not a threat. I don't need a lecture on psychology from maintenance personnel, Seth said coldly. No, you need a lecture on basic pack dynamics from someone who actually understands them. Harper's voice hardened. These cubs have been traumatized. They Watch their entire colony destroy. Itself, they've been poked and studied, and treated like specimens for weeks. Then I showed up and treated them like people, like family. And you want them to just forget that and perform tricks for strangers. Rex moved between Harper and Seth. Protective stance, low warning growl. Stand down, Harper told him gently. She's not a threat, probably. The cub hesitated, then sat but kept himself positioned between Harper and the investigator. Protective behavior, Seth observed. Pack bonding, threat assessment. Sapience, Filma added, all of it points to Sapience. Seth's data pad chimed. She read the message and her expression shifted to something I couldn't identify. We're receiving reports from other facilities. 17 predator species currently in xenobiological research across the sector. 4 stations are reporting similar behavioral changes in their specimens. Enhanced problem solving, social cooperation, attempts at communication. What changed? I asked, though I already suspected. 3 weeks ago, Galactic Scientific Council issued new enrichment guidelines for predator specimens, recommended increased environmental complexity and novel stimulus exposure. Seth looked at Harper. Your station implemented those guidelines early through unauthorized personnel action. I gave them puzzle toys and training games. Harper said. You gave them education, Thelma corrected. You gave them structure and purpose and social connection, and they responded by becoming people. Seth's legal advisor whispered again. Longer this time. The investigator's expression cycled through several emotions before settling on grim resignation. The cubs will be granted provisional sapient status pending full evaluation. She announced this facility will implement immediate protocol changes. Containment will be converted to residential quarters. The cubs will receive education, legal representation. And she looked at Harper with something approaching respect. Appropriate socialization under qualified supervision. My comm exploded with priority alerts. Brantock's voice cut through barely. Controlled panic. Commander, we have a critical situation. The other predator specimens in xenobiology Wing 7 are responding to the cubs' vocalizations. All 17 species, they're communicating with each other. Part 4, in 1400 words for Abinum PM. The wing was chaos when I arrived, not violent chaos. Coordinated chaos, which was somehow worse. 17 containment units housing different predator species, all designed for isolation and observation. Those species were now communicating across barriers, using vocalizations, gesture sequences, and rhythmic wall tapping that created station-wide percussion. They developed a cross-species signaling system in under 3 hours. How is this possible? Brantock stared at his security feeds in disbelief. The cubs taught them, Thelma said, pulling up acoustic analysis. Look at the pattern origin points. It starts with Rex's harmonics, then spreads. The other species are learning and adapting the communication method to their own vocal ranges. Seth watched the feeds with an expression I was learning to recognize as her processing something that broke her worldview face. This suggests predator sapience wasn't absent, it was dormant, waiting for the right environmental trigger. The trigger was someone treating them like they mattered, Harper said quietly. The Vrexian pack in Unit 3 had arranged debris into symbols, the Korean prowlers. In Unit 9, we're solving the containment. Lock mechanisms through coordinated effort. The Sesh hunters in Unit 12 had constructed what looked suspiciously like a schedule chart using food containers and marking their walls with claw scratches. They were all copying the cubs, learning from them, becoming something more. We need to contain this, Seth's legal advisor said, voice tight with panic. If all these species demonstrate sapience, the legal ramifications are irrelevant compared to the ethical ones. Seth cut her off. We can't suppress sapiens because it's legally inconvenient. Shut your mouth and start drafting provisional status paperwork for 17 species. My comm chimed. High Command Admiral. Thesser voice strained. Commander, I'm receiving reports that this situation has spread beyond your station. 5 other research facilities are reporting coordinated behavior in their predator specimens. What in the void is happening? Paradigm shift, I said. We've been assuming predator species lacked sapiens because they didn't demonstrate it in isolation. Turns out they're social learners who need proper socialization and education. We've been studying them in the xenobiological equivalent of solitary confinement. Silence. Then Thier said something I never expected. Fix this, Keithar. I don't care how, but fix this in a way that doesn't make us look like we've been running prison camps for potentially sapient beings. Because if this goes public before we have solutions, the Galactic Council will dismantle xenobiological research entirely. No pressure then. Harper had returned to the cubs. They'd calmed significantly with her presence, but kept vocalizing toward the other containment units, coordinating teaching. Can you ask them to stop? I requested. Just until we figure out protocols. Harper gave me a look that suggested I'd asked her to stop a river from flowing. They're helping their friends. Why would I tell them to stop? Because 17 species achieving sapience simultaneously is going to cause administrative nightmares. Sounds like an administrative problem, not a cub's problem. Rex made a rumbling sound. Harper pulled out her data pad, showed him something. He studied it, then gathered his siblings. They formed a huddle, communicating in their complex harmonics. When they separated, Mika approached Harper and gestured at the data pad. Harper handed it over. Mika, a predator cub with paws designed for ripping meat, carefully manipulated the touchscreen. She pulled up the station schematic, highlighted Xenobiology Wing 7, then began marking specific locations with deliberate taps. She's creating a map, Felma breathed, marking the other containment units. Mika finished and showed Harper. The human studied it, then looked at me. Through the observation window, the cubs want to propose something. Can they present it formally? Formally to whom? To you, the station authority. They understand hierarchy. They want to negotiate. Seth made an amused sound. Sentient beings don't need permission to make proposals. They have rights. Commander, you're about to participate in first contact negotiations with a species you've been holding in containment. The situation was absurd. The cubs were technically children. They were also technically prisoners who'd been illegally detained. They were also potentially the most important xenobiological discovery in a century. My brain couldn't process which Framework to use. Fine, I said, formal. Negotiations. Conference room 720. Minutes. Someone find them something too. Where that looks official. Harper dressed the cubs in modified safety vests with identification badges. They looked ridiculous and somehow dignified simultaneously. She trained them to walk in formation, which they demonstrated perfectly as she led them to the conference room. Seth, Thelma Brantock, and I waited on one side of the table, the cubs arranged themselves opposite us, sitting in perfect posture. Harper stood behind them like a proud parent at a school presentation. Rex placed the data pad on the table and activated the display. The cubs' proposal appeared written in improving but still crude text. Proposal for humanitarian enrichment program. The title read, I noticed they'd used humanitarian deliberately. They understood the irony. The document outlined a systematic approach for socializing all predator species in the facility. Gradual introduction to enrichment activities, structured learning opportunities, social integration between species, educational curriculum development, and, crucially, respect for individual choice and cultural development. They've created a rehabilitation program, Thelma said, scanning through it. This is sophisticated policy work. They've created it based on what Harper did for them. I realize they're trying to give other species the same opportunity they received. Mika gestured at the data pad, then at Harper, then made a motion encompassing the whole station. The meaning was clear. This worked for us. It could work for others. Tesk pulled out papers, the cubs' earlier legal documents, and pointed at specific sections. Then he pointed at himself and his siblings, then at the other containment units. Equal rights, equal treatment, equal opportunity. Vaughn, the quietest cub, approached me. Directly, he placed one paw on my hand, gentle as Harper had taught him. Then he made a sound, soft and questioning, not threatening, asking, pleading almost. He wants to know if we'll help. Harper translated, not just them, all of them. I looked at these 4 cubs who'd gone from specimens to people in 3 weeks, who'd learned to read and write and argue and negotiate, who'd achieved sapience not because they gained new abilities, but because someone finally gave them the chance to use abilities they'd always possessed. This is going to require restructuring our entire xenobiological research framework, I said slowly. Ethical reviews, legal proceedings, probably criminal investigations into past practices. It's going to be complicated and messy and take years. Rex rumbled something that sounded almost like laughter. He says complications are just problems you haven't solved yet, Harper provided. I might have taught him that, of course. You did. I looked at Sethlin. Your call, you have the authority here. Seth studied the cubs for a long moment. Then she signed the data pad with her official authorization seal. Proposal approved, provisional sapient status granted to all predator species, pending individual evaluation. This facility will implement the outlined enrichment program immediately. She paused. And someone promote the human. She clearly understands xenobiological development better than our entire research division. I just trained dogs, Harper protested. You revolutionized our understanding of predator cognition and accidentally triggered cross-species sapient emergence. Thelma corrected. I'd call that promotable. The cubs celebrated by wagging their tails so hard they nearly fell over. Very dignified, very sapient. Harper distributed treats from her pocket and told them they were good boys and girls. They ate the treats and looked pleased with themselves. 6 months later, I filed my quarterly report to High Command. Xenobiology Wing 7 had been converted to educational housing. 43 predator species across 12 stations had achieved recognized sapient status. Harper was now director of interspecies socialization with a salary that made my eyes water. The cubs were enrolled in formal education and had published a paper on pack dynamics that was required reading for xenopsychology students, and I found Harper exactly where this started. Crawling through a floor vent, checking airflow. "You know you have an office now," I said, "with a door and windows. The ventilation system still needs maintenance," Harper replied, completely unbothered by her fancy new title, "and the Vrexian pups like when I visit through the vents makes them feel special." Behind her, Rex squeezed his considerably larger body into the vent opening, clearly intent on following. Harper sighed and made room. "Come on. Then." "But you're explaining to Thelma why you missed your linguistics lesson." Rex made a sound I'd learned meant worth it and disappeared into the vent after his human. The floor vent echoed with happy roars. Somewhere in the educational wing, 40 other predators heard it and responded with their own call, a station-wide chorus of species learning to be people, all because one human decided apex predators just needed structure and enrichment. I filed my report, added a note at the end, recommend expanding maintenance department budget. Apparently they're better at first contact than diplomats.